Story 1. I never thought a simple trip to the bathroom would turn into such a ridiculous situation. But I guess that's what happens when you run into entitled people. Let me tell you about this crazy experience I had with my 5-year-old daughter at a Mexican restaurant. So, there we were, my little girl and I, each in our own stall in this tiny 2-stall restroom. My daughter, being the adorable goofball she is, was doing what most 5-year-olds do in the bathroom, making silly noises and singing little songs to herself. I was in the other stall, minding my own business, when suddenly the door swings open and in walks this woman. Now, I couldn't see her, but I could practically feel the impatience radiating off of her. She didn't waste any time before piping up. "Woman, I hope we're actually going to the bathroom, as I really need to go." I was a bit taken aback by her rudeness, but I tried to keep my cool and explain the situation. "Ma'am, she's 5, and we're both using the bathroom as fast as we can." You'd think that would be enough, right? But no, this lady just couldn't let it go. "Woman, you need to be faster. I really need to hurry. I need to go to the bathroom." At this point, I was starting to get a little irritated. What did she expect us to do? Teleport out of the stalls? "Ma'am, we're going as fast as we can." I heard my daughter finishing up in her stall, and I was pretty much done too. By some stroke of luck, or maybe just to spite this impatient woman, my daughter and I both came out of our stalls at the exact same time. I couldn't resist making a little comment as we passed by her. "Look, ma'am, now you have both stalls all to yourself." I thought that would be the end of it. We'd wash our hands and be on our way. But this woman had one more trick up her sleeve. "Woman, excuse me, I have a hearing aid. I can't hear very well." I couldn't even respond to that. Here she was, claiming she couldn't hear well, when she had clearly heard every word we'd said in the stalls. She'd had no trouble complaining about us being too slow or demanding we hurry up. It was so absurd that I just had to walk away. As my daughter and I left the restroom, I could feel my blood pressure rising. The nerve of some people. Who does that? Who barges into a public restroom and starts hassling people to hurry up? And then to top it off with that hearing aid excuse, it was almost comical. My little girl, bless her heart, was oblivious to the whole drama. She was just happy to have had her bathroom adventure and was already chattering away about what she wanted to eat. I tried to focus on her and push the annoying encounter out of my mind. But you know how these things stick with you. I couldn't help replaying the scene in my head as we walked back to our table. Part of me wished I'd said something more, put that woman in her place. But another part of me was glad I'd taken the high road and just walked away. I have to admit, though, it put a bit of a damper on our meal. Every time I looked towards the restrooms, I half expected to see that woman emerge, probably ready to complain about something else. Luckily, we didn't run into her again. As we finished our food and got ready to leave, I found myself feeling a mix of emotions. Annoyed at the woman's entitled behavior, for sure. But also a little sad that people can be so impatient and rude, especially around children. My daughter didn't seem to notice or care about what had happened, and I was grateful for that. In the end, I guess it's just one of those weird experiences you have to laugh about. Who knew a simple bathroom break could turn into such a bizarre encounter? It's almost like a sitcom scene, except it actually happened to us. As we drove home, my daughter happily singing in the back seat, I decided to let go of the frustration and focus on the positive parts of our day out. After all, we'd had a nice meal, and my little girl had a great time. I wasn't going to let one rude woman ruin that for us. Still, I couldn't help but wonder what that woman's deal was. Was she always like that, or was she just having a really bad day? Either way, I hope she found some peace after finally getting to use the bathroom. And maybe, just maybe, she'll think twice before hassling a mom and her kid in a public restroom again. But somehow, I doubt it. Story 2. My partner, Carl, and I were friends before becoming romantically involved. When he lost his home due to bankruptcy, he moved in with me. He had no job and lived on a disability pension, which he split with his ex-wife, for 14 years after his wife left him. In contrast, I owned my own home, had a successful business, and was quite independent. Despite his circumstances, Carl was handy around the house, loved chatting with neighbors, and had a great sense of humor. He was clean, easy to live with, and we enjoyed each other's company for 10 years. We treated each other well, but Carl had no claim to my assets, and I stayed clear of his family drama. Carl had 2 adult children, Margot 28 and Todd 35. They never visited their father, rarely answered his calls, and when they did, they brushed him off. Carl couldn't understand why his children treated him this way, even though they had been like this for years before I came into the picture. Despite their rudeness, Carl loved them deeply. Carl passed away suddenly one evening at the age of 58. He had been in poor health, and his heart finally gave out. Not even 12 hours after his death, Margot called me, asking if he had any life insurance. For a brief moment, I thought she was concerned about helping with the funeral expenses, but no. She reminded me that according to their mother's separation agreement, Carl was supposed to maintain life insurance, with her and Todd as the beneficiaries. I guess Carl never told her that he canceled the policy once she turned 18 because he couldn't afford it on his disability pension. Later that same day, Margot called again, this time asking about Carl's will. She told me she had already spoken to a lawyer the day after he died, and that since Carl likely didn't have a will, she would be his next of kin. She claimed she would take over all burial arrangements and be the beneficiary of all of his belongings, including his car, which, while used, was still newer than hers. I was shocked by her coldness and the timing of all this. It was unbelievable that they could be so cruel so soon after their father's death. Margot even said she would come to my house to do a walk-through to ensure I didn't keep any of Carl's things. That's when I firmly told her, no, you won't. Margot was furious about my refusal and conveniently forgot to tell me where the funeral would be held. She didn't publish it in the paper and only informed certain people of the location. I later found out it was 3 towns away. But she made sure to constantly remind me that they wanted Carl's car and all of his belongings out of my house. I knew that once she took the car, she wouldn't return for the rest of his things, which were of little value. I would be left to deal with a massive cleanup at my own expense. Cue malicious compliance. Carl was a hoarder, and I mean that in the true sense of the word. He kept everything broken, outdated, or worn out because he believed it might be useful someday. In the garage, which he called his man cave, he had 4 old-style TVs, 6 giant toolboxes, 8 computers, 2 dead BBQs, a floor model drill press he planned to fix, a bandsaw he salvaged from the dump, and 6 stereo components, all of which never worked. But he saved 4 parts. He also had 198 boxes of metal parts from various machines, cars, and trucks he collected over the years. On top of all that, he had a 60-year-old 5-ton metal lathe, which he jokingly said Noah used to build the ark. I parked Carl's car at the very back of my 2-car garage, then piled all 198 boxes and his other belongings in front of it, making it impossible to remove the car without clearing everything else out first, including the massive lathe. It took me 2 weeks, but I packed the garage to the ceiling. I even took a photo of the garage with the doors open for proof. Margot and Todd, frustrated by my refusal to hand over the car, began complaining to their lawyer, accusing me of stalling. They even claimed I had sold the car. In response, I sent the photo of the garage to my lawyer. When he saw the picture, he asked, "Where's the car?" I pointed out the roof of the car barely visible behind the boxes. He couldn't help but laugh. Margot and Todd were forced to hire a moving and storage company to retrieve all of Carl's belongings. The metal lathe alone required 4 men and a special machine to move. It took the movers an entire day to clear out the garage. As they loaded everything, the head mover remarked that there was no way all of this would fit into the one storage unit they had rented. Oh well. In the end, the cost of the movers came to $14,000 according to Carl's best friend, and who knows what the storage units cost. Perhaps they managed to sell some of the scrap metal to recoup their expenses. Oh, and one more thing, they had to pay for Carl's funeral. I had a small insurance policy on Carl, which I intended to use for his burial, but since I wasn't informed about the funeral, I used the money to pay off my mortgage instead. In the end, it would have cost them nothing to show kindness to the woman who took care of their father for 10 years. Story 3. I recently ran into the entitled mother who previously demanded I block her daughter's boyfriend from contacting her. This time, things escalated further. Let me give you a short rundown of what happened. I decided to meet an old friend at a local restaurant on my day off. I was wearing a hoodie with my phone company logo on it. Entitled mother spotted me and demanded that I block her daughter's boyfriend from contacting her daughter, something that I obviously couldn't do. The restaurant manager, who happened to be the owner's daughter, got involved, and entitled mother went on a tirade, threatening to get all of us fired. Eventually, the cops were called, and entitled mother ended up being arrested after refusing to leave and attempting to fight the officer. Fast forward to this time, and I was actually working. Between job sites, I stopped by my cousin's restaurant for lunch. This restaurant, named after our great-grandfather, is a local favorite about 30 minutes from anywhere else. It's a place with a strong customer base, and many regulars joke about knowing Clyde, a reference to my great-grandfather, even though there hasn't been a Clyde in the family for over 30 years. It's a tradition that if someone claims to know Clyde, they're on the hook for buying a round of drinks for the bar. Locals know the drill, and it's all in good fun. Now, let's get to the cast of characters. Me, obviously. Entitled mother, the entitled mom from before, now with her group of friends entitled mother's friend 1-3 and their rowdy kids. Amy the waitress, bartender, and bouncer who is also a longtime family friend and a no-nonsense military veteran. Niece my cousin's daughter, who calls me uncle. Cousin the owner of the restaurant. Various local patrons, the regulars who are well aware of the Clyde tradition. So, as I sit at the bar, Amy brings me my usual signal to let the family know I'm there, a whole fried chicken and white toast. That's when I hear a familiar voice, loud and obnoxious, shouting across the room. It's entitled mother, screaming about how I'm the reason her daughter is dating a psychopath. She goes on to say I'm the reason she can't go back to another restaurant and declares that this time I'm on her turf. Her friends, entitled mother's friend 1-3, chime in with encouragement like a flock of hens. I try to ignore her at first, but she gets louder. Amy walks over, gives me a look that says, "What is her problem?" Entitled mother, now in full Karen mode, tells Amy, "He needs to be thrown out." Amy tells her to control her kids or leave, and that's when things get really ridiculous. One of the entitled friends, entitled mother's friend 1, jumps in, pointing at me and claiming that I'm bothering them. Amy isn't having it, though, and warns them again. Just as things are escalating, my niece runs out from the back and gives me a big hug. Entitled mother then accuses me of fondling a little girl, even though my niece is 19 and clearly an adult. The bar erupts with laughter because, of course, this is all a big misunderstanding. Amy confronts entitled mother, asking her, "So, you know Clyde?" The locals snicker because they know where this is going. Entitled mother, trying to assert herself, says, "Yes, I know him. We're good friends." This prompts another round of laughter from the crowd. One of the other moms, entitled mother's friend 2, tries to join in, claiming, "My husband is Clyde." The bar erupts even louder, and by now, entitled mother and her friends are visibly annoyed. I decide to walk over to their table and point to a photo on the wall, one from our last family reunion before Clyde passed. Before I can explain, entitled mother's friend 3 interrupts, claiming that her husband owns the place. I just laugh and walk back to my seat, knowing they've dug themselves into a hole. At this point, my cousin, the actual owner, steps out and politely asks them to leave. Entitled mother, still in full Karen mode, refuses, insisting that she knows the owner. Amy and a retired county sheriff, who happens to be a regular, flank my cousin, which only causes more complaints from entitled mother. After paying their tab reduced since they didn't actually authorize paying for rounds, Amy literally has to escort entitled mother out of the restaurant. As entitled mother is being dragged out, She's still screaming about how unfairly she's being treated. But wait, there's more. Not content with the scene they've already caused, entitled mother and her friends have someone call the restaurant, pretending to be Clyde, and demanding that their meal be comped and that I be banned from the place. They even go as far as threatening to have my niece fired. When my niece hands me the phone, I decide to mess with them a bit. I pretend to be a new employee and go along with their demands before finally telling them, none of that is going to happen. I work for the phone company, and you're using an electronic device to commit fraud. The caller hangs up quickly, but entitled mother and her friends still aren't deterred. They call the cops. By the time the police arrive, entitled mother and her friends have spun a wild tale of me being a threat and molesting my niece. Once the officers hear the real story and see that entitled mother has no ownership of the place, they quickly realize the women are full of nonsense. One of them even peels out of the parking lot and gets pulled over. After all the chaos, I finally get to enjoy my cousin's famous Irish potato soup and a Reuben sandwich. And as for entitled mother, well, let's just say she won't be coming back to Clyde's place anytime soon. Story 4. My daughter was 5 years old at the time, and her birthday falls near Mother's Day in the US according to our court order. I get her on Mother's Day, and if her birthday happens to land on that day, which happens every 5 years or so, we split the day between us. That year, her birthday was close to Mother's Day, so I picked her up for the weekend, but something was off. She seemed visibly upset with me and wouldn't talk about why. I tried to cheer her up by planning a fun weekend. We threw her a birthday party that included horseback riding and her favorite ice cream cake. As usual, we talked about the fun things we had planned for Mother's Day itself. My daughter and my husband were going to make me breakfast in bed. We planned to attend a gathering with friends and then visit my in-laws for dinner. Mother's Day morning began with a 7 a.m. phone call from my ex-boyfriend's wife. Let's call her Karen. I didn't answer because I was still asleep. When we woke up at 8:30 a.m., I saw I had 5 missed calls and just as many voicemails. Karen was demanding that my daughter call her to wish her a happy Mother's Day, claiming, "It's my day too," and calling me selfish for not making it happen. I ignored the calls and turned off my phone so we could enjoy the morning. My daughter and husband made me breakfast Pop-Tarts and chocolate milk super sweet considering her age, and I opened my cards and gifts. We got ready and went to the gathering, where the usual activities took place. During arts and crafts time, something happened that my friend felt was important enough to bring to my attention. To give you some background, my daughter had been speaking in full sentences since she was 18 months old, reading since she was 3, and had an extensive vocabulary. Even now, at 13, she reads at a 12th grade level and is in her school's gifted program. At the gathering, the lesson for the kids was about how to honor their mothers, and one of the children mentioned that lying wasn't honoring your parents and that telling the truth was important. During this discussion, my daughter asked my friend, "What if the mommy lies to you?" When my friend asked her what she meant, my daughter explained, "Karen told me that my mommy wanted to kill me when I was in her belly and that my dad saved my life. She also said that my mommy doesn't love me and only wants to hurt my dad. I don't think that's true." When asked when she was told this, my daughter replied, "Karen told me on Friday when mommy picked me up. She said mommy didn't deserve to have me on Mother's Day because she isn't my real mommy." My friend, who was shocked by this, encouraged my daughter to talk to me later about it and reassured her that I loved her very much and would never harm her or anyone else. Hearing this, I was furious. I turned my phone back on and saw 27 missed calls and 18 voicemails, all from Karen. I handed my phone to my trusted friend, who listened to the voicemails and deleted them, as they were just filled with insults and ignorance. I decided to hold my tongue, put on a smile, and enjoy the day. Later, I shared what happened with my husband privately. The next morning, I contacted my attorney, who advised me to get a written statement from my friend to use as evidence of emotional abuse. When it was time to drop off my daughter with her dad, Karen was there. She scolded my daughter for not calling her on Mother's Day and berated me. telling me I needed to learn to co-parent. She stood outside the big box store where we did our exchange and screamed at me in front of random bystanders, calling me a great egg donor, but obviously not a real mother. As I walked away after saying goodbye to my daughter, Karen handed my daughter to her dad and followed me to my car. She started banging on my windows, screaming through the glass, so I turned up my car's radio as loud as I could. She even tried to chase my car as I drove off, but a bystander stopped her. A couple of hours later, I got a call from the police. Karen had claimed that I had hit her with my car and wanted to press charges. The police asked me to come to the store to resolve the situation. I brought my husband with me just in case I was arrested. At the store, the manager, who happened to be my brother-in-law, had called in a manager from another location to avoid any appearance of bias. The police reviewed the security footage, and my daughter sat in the car with her dad, while Karen sat in the back of an ambulance, claiming I had run her down and almost hit my daughter. After reviewing the footage, the officer took my statement. I explained the situation and showed them the missed call log on my phone. The officer then gathered all of us together, including Karen, my ex, my husband, and me. The officer turned to Karen and said, "Do you realize the trouble you've caused?" Karen, smiling smugly, responded, "Excuse me." The officer continued, "You filed a false police report, which is illegal. I could arrest you right now. Not only did you lie about being hit by a car, but you also harassed op and created unnecessary chaos." Karen, now panicking, stammered, "That's not true. She tried to hit me. The cameras saw it." The officer replied, "The cameras saw you chase after op's car and hit it multiple times with your fists before she drove off. You said you wouldn't leave without an arrest, so turn around." He pulled out his handcuffs. Karen cried, "Why would I get arrested? I didn't do anything wrong." She doctored the footage. My ex, realizing the seriousness of the situation, pleaded with the officer, "Officer, I can't afford to bail her out. Is there anything we can do to make this go away?" The officer responded, "She can start by apologizing, and I can issue a hefty fine for disturbing the peace." Reluctantly, my ex told her, "Just apologize. I don't care if you're actually sorry, just do it." Through tears, Karen muttered, "Fine, I'm sorry. Please don't let my daughter see me in cuffs." I corrected her, "You mean our daughter." Karen, still hysterical, was issued a ticket for disturbing the peace and given a court date. The officer made sure I could give my daughter a hug and a juice box from the store before we left, as she was upset by all the commotion. When we got to court, Karen tried to justify her actions, claiming I had started everything by not answering the phone on Mother's Day. The judge scoffed, upheld her fine, and sentenced her to 20 hours of community service, remarking that it would help her adjust her attitude. As the judge banged his gavel, Karen sat in her chair crying, "I wasn't wrong. Why am I being punished? I don't deserve this." Justice was served that day. And yes, the transcript from the earlier incident was used in a custody hearing. Story 5. The city I live in has extremely inflated vehicle prices compared to neighboring areas. You can easily save $3,000 to $4,000 by buying the same car from a nearby state. Whenever I'm looking for a new vehicle, which happens every 3-4 years, I compare prices across different states. This story took place about 5 years ago, and the malicious compliance is still ongoing. I was searching for a brand new car and found one that matched my specifications about 12 hours away in a neighboring state. It was priced $5,000 below the market value. I checked flights and found a one-way direct flight to the dealership's local airport for $175. Adding gas to drive back, the total cost would be about $275, a steal for saving $5,000. I contacted the dealership, negotiated a bit, and agreed on a price. I let them know I would be flying in to pick up the car and offered to pay in full beforehand. They told me that all they needed was a $1,000 deposit to secure the vehicle. We signed a contract, and I paid the deposit. Then, I booked my flight for 3 days later. First sign of trouble. When I arrived at the airport, the dealership was supposed to pick me up. This had been arranged in advance. However, after a quick phone call, they told me to take an Uber to the dealership, promising to cover the cost. Annoying, but I went along with it. Second sign of trouble. When I arrived at the dealership, the salesman asked if I wanted to walk the lot to look at a few cars. I was confused because I had already picked a car and signed a contract. When I pressed him about the car I had purchased, the one with the specific VIN listed in our contract, I was told it was no longer available. The salesman tried to show me similar cars, but they were all priced $2,000 over MSRP instead of $5,000 under. Classic bait and switch tactic. Important note for later: there was no mention or signage of any incentives for leaving 5-star reviews. After about 2-3 hours of going back and forth, I was convinced the dealership never had the car they promised. They refused to offer me a comparable vehicle at a similar price and wouldn't cover my travel expenses. I ended up having a heated conversation with the general manager (GM), who told me to go ahead and leave a bad review, but insisted I wasn't getting any free money from them. I took an Uber to a nearby hotel, booked a flight home for the next day, and ended up spending about $750 total on this failed car purchase. Cue the malicious compliance. The dealership had an average Google rating of 4.5 stars with about 400 reviews, pretty solid for a dealership. That night in my hotel room, I had some free time, so I spent a couple of hours creating new email accounts and left about 21-star reviews for the dealership. I didn't stop there, though. My attention shifted to recovering my lost travel expenses. After returning home, I sent a demand letter to the dealership for $750, which they ignored. Since the contract was made in both states, I filed a small claims suit in my state. The dealership didn't show up to court, and I won a default judgment for $750. After some back and forth, certified letters, and phone calls, I eventually collected the $750 about a year later. Despite recovering my money, I was still upset. What they did was wrong on so many levels. My friends knew the story, and since the dealership had pulled a bait and switch, they left a few bad reviews too, but nothing more than a standard angry customer response. Long-term malicious compliance. At some point, I started leaving bad reviews for the dealership whenever I had a few minutes to spare. Each time, I created a new account to leave another 1-star review. Fast forward 2-3 years. Leaving reviews became a habit. Their average rating dropped to 1.9 stars with nearly 3,500 reviews, and I'm personally responsible for at least half of those reviews. The dealership's website now has a banner offering $50 for a 5-star review. They've been doing this for about a year, likely in response to the growing number of 1-star reviews. Assuming I'm responsible for half of their total reviews, the dealership has spent at least $50,000 trying to buy better reviews, and yet their average rating continues to drop. All because they told me to go ahead and leave a bad review. Edited to add. Yes, I got my $1,000 deposit back through my credit card, and I couldn't sue for the time spent or force the dealership to honor the contract since it exceeded small claims limits. While the case was likely winnable if I pursued it, the legal fees and time made it not worth pursuing. And no, I won't provide the dealership's name. Some companies sue people for bad reviews, and I'd rather not risk that. I did report their review buying practices, along with screenshots, to Google. If anything comes of that, I'll update this post, though it may take some time. Story 6. At my previous job, I worked for a company that was regulated by several powerful government agencies. When they requested something, it was expected to be delivered immediately, and if there was too much delay, they'd rather shut down operations than wait for the required data, information, or prototypes. I was provided with a company phone that I had to carry everywhere. There were rotating on-call periods, but I was expected to be available at all times in case of emergencies. The phone was a special model from a well-known fruit-branded company, not a standard US version. It had 2 networks and could automatically switch to the stronger one, possibly even using both simultaneously. Needless to say, it was quite expensive. I'm a nature lover and often go on camping trips, sometimes in remote places where I don't see other people for days. About 18 months into the job, I was on a schedule that gave me 3 days on call, working a regular 8-hour day and living within 20 minutes of the office, followed by 4 days off. This arrangement worked perfectly for me. As soon as the next on-call team took over, I'd be off to explore a national or state park. Despite being off duty, I would always carry my company phone just in case. In a year and a half, I was never contacted while not on call, thanks to the excellent communication within our team, but I kept the phone with me anyway. During one trip, the phone screen was damaged. It was still functional but difficult to use. When I returned, I went through the process of getting it repaired or replaced. That's when a higher-up in it lost it. She went on and on about how expensive the phone was, how hard it was to configure, and how much more difficult it was to get these phones in the US. She also reprimanded me, saying I wasn't allowed to take the phone anywhere except between my home and the office. To top it off, she threw in some highly inappropriate and derogatory comments, which included racial undertones. Afterward, I sent an email confirming her instructions, keeping my manager and department head in the loop. Cue malicious compliance. A few weeks later, I took some tow. The company's tow policy was pretty generous, and I took 3 weeks off, while still having over 3 weeks remaining. As instructed by the manager, I did not take the company phone or any other hardware with me during my time off. An all-hands-on-deck situation arose while I was on tow. My manager was furious that I wasn't answering the company phone. I wasn't deep in the woods, but at my cousin's place, helping her recover after a difficult twin pregnancy. My manager managed to get my personal number through some work friends. Manager, why aren't you answering the company phone? Me, I'm not at home, and I don't have the company phone with me. Manager, never mind that, get online immediately. We have an emergency. Me, sorry, I don't have any of the company hardware with me. Manager, clearly frustrated, why not? Me, the manager said I wasn't allowed to take the company hardware anywhere except between my home and the office. I emailed you and the department head about this, remember? After going through her emails and realizing I was telling the truth, she let out a string of expletives. Manager, you need to come back right now. Me, I can't. My cousin is still recovering, and I told you before I went on tow that I wouldn't be able to return early. The call ended, but she called back 30 minutes later. Manager, does anyone have access to your apartment? Me? Yes, I have someone who does. Manager, give me their contact information. I'm going to have your company phone, computer, and other hardware shipped to you today so you can get back to work. This is serious. Me, if that's the case, could I get additional tow to make up for this intrusion? Manager, sure, I'll send an email approving it. By 8 p.m., I had all the necessary equipment shipped to me. I also received 2 emails, one approving the extended tow and another from my department head, stating that the original company policy was still in place. In fact, a new policy had been implemented requiring some employees to keep company hardware with them, even on tow. Any previous instructions, including those from the manager, were to be disregarded. The manager was CC'd on this email. When I returned from tow, that manager was no longer around. She had been demoted and eventually quit because she couldn't handle it. The company spent over $6,000 to ship the hardware to me on the same day. Additional context. 1. I probably wasn't even needed during the emergency. Our team had great communication, and others were aware of what needed to be done. However, if regulators asked for additional information while people were already working on other things, it would have been helpful to have more people available. The regulators were strict and could shut down the business if deadlines weren't met. 2. The company was generally respectful of time off and didn't contact employees on tow unless it was absolutely necessary. When they did, they compensated us with additional time off, which was reasonable. 3. Some people may not see this as a win because it required me to carry the company phone and laptop even during time off. But in this industry, especially in the US, things work differently than in Europe, and certain precautions are necessary. 4. I didn't destroy the manager's career. She brought it on herself. She was high up in it, but her lack of understanding about the broader business implications led to her demotion. 5. The original company policy required employees to keep their company phone with them while on tow, but other hardware wasn't necessary unless explicitly requested. Since my phone was damaged during one of my trips, I had followed the instructions I was given.